I came to the realization the other day that I have not gone to the cinemas to watch a movie since Rise of Skywalker came out late in 2019. The reason for this wasn't because the movie was so crap it's scared me away or anything.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But it was mostly a combination of not having any movies I was, immediately excited to go and see, and a little of that tiny little pandemic that shut down the world for 2.5 years. The idea of sitting in a room with 100 or so other people, breathing in recycled air, sitting on seats that 5 or 6 other people have already sat on the same day without being cleaned, listening to people fiddle with their drinks that you can hear every time they pick them up because there's way too much ice in them. Even the sound of people whispering, or sometimes even flat out just having a conversation with each other during the movie. I guess you could say it's not my favourite way to experience movies anymore. That's not to say that I've had nothing but bad experience at the cinemas. Seeing Captain America in Avengers Endgame grab the hammer in a packed theatre and having people actually cheering was an amazing experience. Watching multiple people leave in the theatre in disgust when Luke Skywalker force ghosted out of the franchise in Last Jedi was actually really, really funny. Or when I watched Crimson Peak and these two guys who were sitting next to me got so scared during the movie and they were holding onto each other for dear life, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy style. But I just feel like I can enjoy a movie much more from the comfort of my own home. And that's the way I've just been watching movies for the last 4.5 years. And that was until this week when I broke my dry run with Madam Web. Why would you do this, you might ask? And I'm actually not quite sure myself, but as I sat down and watched this movie in a mostly empty theatre in the early afternoon on a weekday, I was constantly asking myself the same question. Why? Why would you do this? Not only to myself, but to the movie as well. Because every decision that was made in the creation and development of this movie would have benefited if someone just asked that question. Why would you do this? So if you don't know, Madam Web is the latest movie in the cinematic landfill that is the Sony Spider-Man universe. I don't think Spider-Man universe is a good name for it, considering Spider-Man hasn't actually appeared in it yet. So let's call it a more fitting name. I'm going to call it the Morbinverse. The first 2 movies in the Morbinverse were the Venom movies, which were not great. The second one was fun, kinda. They're just both very average movies. And then we have Morbius, which is a movie I've never actually finished watching. Every time I would try to watch Morbius, I just fall asleep. It's so fucking boring. No joke, 3 separate times I've tried to watch Morbius, and shit's better than sleeping pills. Which brings us to Madam Web, the 4th installment in the Morbinverse.
This is an emergency. Get off the train.
That man's trying to kill you.
What? Julia, get down!
So, hey Sony, why would you do this? I'm going to be upfront with you guys on this one. I'm not even going to pretend for 1 second that this movie is worth watching. Seriously, do not go and spend your time or your money on this movie. It is incomprehensibly terrible, and it needs to be seen to be believed, but you shouldn't go see it because then Sony will get money and they won't learn otherwise.
You can't keep getting away with it!
I watched this movie once, and I'm gonna do my best to describe the things that are wrong with this movie from memory. I'm not gonna do a second watch through just for notes, as I probably normally would with anything else, because I just fucking hated this movie so much. Also, because this movie is still in theaters, any scene that isn't in the trailer or any clips I can find online, I'm just gonna have to do my best to recreate on my whiteboard here. So the movie begins in this jungle somewhere and with a research team of some kind. They're looking for a spider. The lead research woman, played by Carrie Bish, who's actually really fantastic in the show *Halt and Catch Fire*, which you should absolutely watch instead of this movie. She's looking for a spider of some sort. She has this conversation with a dude who's the main bad guy in the movie. This isn't a spoiler, by the way, because 30 seconds later, after this conversation, when the main researcher woman finds the spider, he just fucking starts blasting the researchers away. He leaves the pregnant researcher alive and then just tries to wrestle the spider away from her, and then he shoots her in the scuffle. But it's why would you do this? He explains his motivations when he shoots everyone, but they don't make sense. The woman researcher is oh, we could have helped so many people with this spider. And he's well, nobody helped me when I needed it. I need the spider. And then he just they're in the Amazon rainforest, aren't they? Like, it's pretty remote. You know, he probably could have just stolen the spider at night while everyone was asleep, and he wouldn't have had to just, like, you know, waste everyone. Like, it seemed like he was going to leave the pregnant researcher girl alive if she didn't, like, hold on to the spider. Like, I get the movie needs the pregnant researcher woman to get shot for the movie, but, like, just, like, have her confront him while he's sneaking away during the night. Like, it's a little more cliche, but it's, like, at least it's not batshit insane. Like, there was so many things wrong here that this is, like, the first 5 minutes of the movie, and everything's already so contrived. And, like, as the pregnant researcher lady is, like, on the ground, like, bleeding out, these, like, tribesmen just start, like, climbing out of the trees, and they just, like, take her away. There's, like, no build-up. It just literally just happens. Ugh. It was at this point that the movie had, like, already lost me. I was 5 minutes in and I was just dumbfounded. There is just so much wrong with this movie as a whole that if I could remember all the things wrong with it, we'd be here for hours. Madam Web revolves around Cassie, who is the daughter of the dead pregnant researcher woman, and her deal is that she essentially has final destination powers. And let me tell you, they do not find a creative way to use this premise at all. You know, the actual Final Destination movie, you know, the movie that came out 24 fucking years ago, did this premise better. Cassie is played by Dakota Johnson, who's pretty good in Bad Times at El Royale, which you should definitely watch instead of this movie. Because in this movie, she's, well, you know, it's not her fault. So whose fault is this? So let's take a look at the director, S.J. Clarkson. S.J. Clarkson has mostly directed episodes of TV. Directing TV is a lot different from movie directing, especially when you're only directing like 1 or 2 episodes of a show, which she seems to have done. They've directed one of my favorite episodes from the first season of Succession, which is a good start, but I think a better way to judge the quality of their work is to look at something like Lateral or Anatomy of a Scandal, where she directed every episode and would have had more control over the overall quality. And those shows have alright rating. By all metrics from this director's history, I'd say they were up for the job. But I will say though, the action in this movie was kind of arse, so if that was the movie's biggest problem, then I'd say it's the director's fault, but it really isn't. The biggest problem with this movie is absolutely the writing. Oh, and you know what? Never mind, because SJ is credited as writing the screenplay. Whoops. But also along with these two guys, Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. And if we look at their history, these guys are also credited as writing for the movie Dracula Untold, Gods of Egypt, oh, and Morbius. Fucking Morbius. How do these guys have jobs? Oh my god. You know what? I don't even blame these guys either, or any of the writing staff, because this movie should never have just been greenlit in the first place. So, whose fault is this? I believe the blame falls entirely and squarely on Sony Movie Studios. Sony, why would you do this? There's this one part in the movie where the main bad guy goes to the opera and he like brings this woman home with him and he sleeps with her, and then he like wakes up the next morning from a nightmare, and obviously he wakes up the woman next to him and he like just exposition dumps his whole deal to her, where he sees himself get murdered every night in his dreams by like 3 teenagers, spider women or whatever the fuck, and he just exposition dumps to this woman about how he's going to hunt down these 3 teenagers and kill them. Turns out he has ulterior motives with the woman he slept with, because he like poisons her and then just like coerces information out of her before he kills her. But like, why did he do that? He could have just, you know, not slept with the woman and did like the poisoning and the coercion and stuff like the night before. Like, what if the sex was like really bad and she was like embarrassed and left in the middle of the night or something like that? This fucking guy just feels like a character doing a full evil speedrun on Baldur's Gate. Hey, this pregnant person has something I want. Let's just fucking shoot her. Hey, I need this woman's password to get into some national security thing. Let's seduce her at the opera, take her home, bang her, trauma dump on her, and then murder her. This guy is fucking insane. And I kind of wish there was more of him in the movie, because anytime he monologues or says anything, really, it is just like the dumbest, weirdest shit. It is so bad, it is funny. Like, he also has this assistant helping him, played by Zoja Marmot, by the way, who's great in The Flight Attendant, which you should definitely watch instead of this movie. And I swear the only thing the main guy, like, talks to this chick about is killing a bunch of teenagers. And she's, like, visibly uncomfortable with this. It's so weird because like he could just lie to her or something. He could like just feed her some BS about these teenagers being like radicalized terrorists or something. Or like maybe even just like she believes him about the visions, I think. So maybe even just say that they're going to destroy the city in the future or something like that. You know, the movie is set in 2003. So you could like lean into the fears that people were having during this time period in New York City where this movie is set. But he just straight up tells her he wants to murder a bunch of teenagers because he thinks they're going to kill him one day. Like, subtlety is just not a word in this dude's dictionary. Oh my god, Adam Scott is in this movie as well, who's absolutely fantastic in Severance, which you should definitely watch instead of watching this movie. And he plays Uncle Ben right before he becomes an uncle. Him and Cassie are like best friends, and there is absolutely no reason for him to be a character in this movie. You could replace this character with anyone else, and the only difference it would make is that the baby that was born at the end of this movie wouldn't be Peter Parker, which, you know what, doesn't matter anyway, because it has no relevance to the plot and it shouldn't be in the movie. What is the point of having Mary Parker give birth in the movie? It's like, no, she's not a character. You know what Uncle Ben's inclusion actually does? It raises questions. Like, Cassie, or Madam Web, essentially becomes a precog omniscient being at the end of the movie, which probably means at some point she knows that he's going to be murdered and could probably save his life. You know what actually would have been cool is like having that be a plot point in the actual movie. Because now that I think about it, spoilers for the second Spider-Verse movie real quick. Time code below to skip spoilers because you really should watch the Spider-Verse movies for yourself. They're amazing. You know how in that movie there's a plot point that like a father figure dying is a canon event for like all the Spider-Men? You know, the Uncle Ben's with great power, yada yada, is a turning point or a kind of guiding light for them. What if Madam Web could see the future of Peter Parker as Spider-Man and come to the conclusion that for this version of Spider-Man to be the best Spider-Man he could be, she had to let her best friend die to make it happen? I mean, the story takes place in 2003, so that can't realistically happen. And also, Sony seems to be too scared to pull the trigger on which Spider-Man actually inhabits the morbin-verse, but it doesn't have to be Uncle Ben. We could take this story beat and apply it to any character. You know, have the precognition powers come with some tough choices. You know, at least then I would have felt that the people who wrote the story actually put like some thought into it instead of doing cocaine while ChatGPT shat out a script. There was a point in the movie where Cassie was like teaching the three powerless Spider Girls CPR in a motel room, and I kind of just started to wonder if this movie even had a script at all. Hardly any of the dialogue that like feels natural. It's mostly just people expositioning to each other, and whenever it does start to feel at all normal, it will just quickly like hard pivot back into the exposition dialogue, and the characters will just tell you straight to your face like what character development happened. Like they're doing a CPR for 2 minutes, like learning it, and then the powerless Spider Girls are all like, "Wow, Cassie, you are such a great teacher." And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's happened. That's character development now. If I had to guess, there must have just been a lot of ad-libbing from the actors in this movie, because the actors just kind of shift in the way they speak when they don't directly have to move the plot along. And listen, I do not blame any of the actors in this movie at all for turning in like a bad performance. Dakota Johnson just looks like she is completely checked out of this movie. Adam Scott looks like really pissed off he even has to be here. Like he's like was really happy to play Uncle Ben. He's like, oh wow, this iconic character. And then he's like read the script and he's like, oh no. And like Sydney Sweeney, she actually looks like she's trying, the poor thing. It hurts to watch because she is trying. Look, the only way any actor could have really saved this movie is if they just like casted the whole thing via like a random lottery from every actor in Hollywood, and then the movie would have just been so weird it might have actually just been entertaining. It takes a lot for me to like actively despise a movie, and there are very few movies that can really get me to that place. Like a movie like Suicide Squad, for example. Like Suicide Squad is a Frankenstein of a movie. Like the story is a tonal mess with obnoxiously terrible editing and awful dialogue.
This is Katana. She's got my back. I would advise not getting killed by her. Her sword traps the souls of its victims.
But I could see at points what the movie was trying to do. With Madam Web, I just cannot see what they were going for, because the movie just fails on every single level. The movie was marketed as a suspense thriller movie. Now, if you want to make your comic book movie a suspense thriller, then that's a great idea. But I suggest you make your movie either or any one of those things. Like, I'm not against having a comic book blockbuster movie just being a mindless action movie. I'm all for taking risks and trying something different. But if your movie is not living up to the genres that you set out to go for, then all we're left with is 1.5 terribly directed action sequences within an almost 2-hour long movie. So let's talk about setup and payoff. In the intro of the movie, after the pregnant researcher lady gives birth in a very suspectly coloured cave pool, the spider tribe man who delivers the baby tells the researcher lady as she's dying that one day Cassie will come back looking for answers. And this does happen in the movie. Very simple, setup plus payoff. Cassie, in an attempt to understand and control her powers, comes back, 20, 30 years later and meets with the Spider Tribe guy, where he pushes her astral form into the pool, and while she's in there, she gains the power to split into multiple forms so she can be in multiple places at the same time, which is a very random power to gain. But so how do we know that she gains this power? Well, the Spider Tribe guy just flat out explains it to us. In the final action sequence of the movie, she uses this power to save the 3 still powerless Spider Girls, who are all just in immediate peril. And, this is the payoff. So the movie understands what a setup and what a payoff is. Good. But what the movie gets wrong is the result. And the result should be a satisfying conclusion. In the latest Taika Waititi movie, Next Goal Wins, throughout the movie we see Michael Fassbender's character always wearing the same hat. And throughout parts of the movie we also hear voicemail messages left to him from his daughter. There are 2 setups here. Now, there's a part of the movie where Michael Fassbender's character is told that he doesn't have access to a phone or doesn't have reception or something, and he has to use a public payphone to call people. So that already has us kind of questioning part of one of the setups here, mostly because it doesn't really make much sense. But towards the end of the movie, in the halftime locker room where the team is down 1-0 in the climactic game of the movie, Michael Fassbender's character tries to inspire and connect with his team. And to do this, he tells the story of how his daughter died, and how he wears the hat, which was hers, as a way of honouring her memory. It's a very emotional moment, but despite having a bit of a shaky setup, there is a very satisfying payoff. Next Goal Wins is, in my opinion, a mediocre movie. The highs are not enough to offset the lows that this movie goes through, but it shows that you don't even have to get all the parts of a setup done correctly to get a payoff that has a satisfying conclusion. So that makes it all the more baffling when Madam Web just gets every part of this wrong. The setup of the Spider Tribe man telling Cassie exactly what her new powers are, it's kind of ridiculous. And when the powerless Spider Girls all one by one get put into peril, like they're hanging off like scaffolding or something, all at the same time, we know that Cassie is just going to use that exact power at that exact time to save them all at once. There is no surprise, there is no suspense, there is no twist, and that's the problem with everything in this movie. It just happens. Like, the setup was whack, the payoff was predictable, so we get an unsatisfying conclusion. I mean, to the movie's credit though, it isn't totally predictable. Like, I did not predict the main bad guy would die by getting squished by a giant neon Pepsi sign. Was that satisfying? No, but it was actually just so absurd, but I couldn't just help but think why would you do this? Overall, Madam Web is a movie I do not think anyone should watch. The fact that it even exists is an absolute enigma to me, and I honestly just feel so sorry for anyone who worked on this movie. Look, you did your job, and I hope you got paid well. If I were to give this movie a score, it'd probably be a 1.5 out of 10. Technically speaking, there is a movie here. It was shot, it had lighting, there were special effects that weren't the worst I'd ever seen, and that by itself is an achievement, because making movies is hard. If everyone could do it, they would. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. As a consumer though, I do not think it is worth spending your money to watch this. And after watching this movie myself, I just can't help but feel this movie was just doomed to be terrible from the start. And I find it hard to believe that a movie like this can actually get made if there isn't just something extremely wrong somewhere with either the process of greenlighting the project or the way that the studio handled the project altogether. It's hard to comprehend all of the decisions that would have had to have been made that eventually led to this movie being released in this state. It really begs the question, out of all the movies you could have made, all of the story beats you decided would go into the movie, the $80 million that was spent on it, why would you do this? If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I don't really like to just, completely shit on things, but I just found the sheer amount of incompetence when it came to this movie to be absolutely baffling. I probably missed a lot of things. Like I said before, I only watched this movie once and I'm not willing to sit through this shit again. I'm not spending another $20. Anyway, please leave a like if you enjoyed this video and consider subscribing if you're new and would like to see more. I will see you in the next video with hopefully something much, much less negative.